Putin struck Ivano-Frankivsk yesterday in what the mayor called the heaviest attack of the entire war, a city hundreds of miles from the front line, practically on NATO's doorstep. But this escalation to western Ukraine just guaranteed Putin's ultimate defeat in a way he never saw coming. Every dictator in history has faced the same choice: know when to stop or face total destruction. Putin's decision to attack regions bordering NATO territory shows he's chosen the path that ends only one way. But the consequences of this escalation are already cascading beyond Putin's control. Germany and the US immediately agreed to deliver 5 Patriot systems, NATO accelerated weapons deliveries, and European officials who experienced the attacks firsthand now treat this as a direct threat to European security. The strategic miscalculation Putin made by attacking western Ukraine will show you exactly why his defeat is now mathematically inevitable. Putin's strike on Ivano-Frankivsk yesterday marked a strategic turning point that guaranteed his ultimate defeat. The mayor called it the heaviest attack of the entire war on a city hundreds of miles from the front line, practically sitting on NATO's doorstep near the Polish and Romanian borders. This wasn't military strategy, it was desperation. Ivano-Frankivsk has no significant military value. The strikes hit residential buildings and civilian facilities in surrounding villages, injuring several people, including children. Putin was attacking civilians in western Ukraine for one reason: to terrorize NATO. But the attack revealed Putin's fatal miscalculation. By striking regions bordering NATO territory, he proved he was willing to risk direct confrontation with the alliance. This eliminated any remaining European reluctance to provide advanced weapon systems to Ukraine. The Guardian reported that the attack was the biggest on Ivano-Frankivsk since the 2022 invasion began. The escalation to western Ukraine, far from any military objectives, proved Putin was no longer fighting a rational war. He was lashing out in desperation, but the most damaging aspect was the timing. The attack came as European officials were visiting Ukraine and experiencing the war firsthand. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot spent 2 hours hiding during the Kyiv assault, giving European leadership visceral understanding of the threat. Putin's decision to attack western Ukraine while European officials were in the country sealed his fate by turning potential allies into committed enemies. The European response was immediate and decisive. Germany and the United States agreed within hours to deliver 5 Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine, with Germany prepared to pay for the fastest possible delivery. The attack on western Ukraine had triggered exactly what Putin feared most: deeper NATO involvement. The French foreign minister's experience hiding during the attack crystallized European understanding of the threat. When he said shelters themselves are no longer entirely safe, European leaders realized they weren't just supporting Ukraine, they were defending European democracy itself. But the immediate consequence went beyond weapons deliveries. The Ukraine Defense Contact Group of 50 Western allies accelerated coordination and increased military support. Britain committed £700 million for air defense and artillery ammunition. France allocated an additional €200 million for Ukraine's infrastructure. The attack on western Ukraine proved to European leaders that Putin wouldn't stop at Ukraine's borders. If he was willing to strike cities near NATO territory, he was willing to threaten NATO territory directly. This realization changed everything about European strategic calculations. But the most significant consequence was political. European officials who had experienced Russian attacks firsthand became the most vocal advocates for increased military support to Ukraine. Putin had turned potential moderates into committed hawks through his own actions. The immediate consequence of attacking western Ukraine was the acceleration of exactly the NATO involvement Putin had tried to prevent. Putin's escalation to western Ukraine revealed the depth of his strategic miscalculation. Every previous attack had been designed to avoid provoking NATO directly. The strikes on Ivano-Frankivsk, practically on the alliance's doorstep, abandoned that caution entirely. The escalation came from weakness, not strength. With over 1,043,160 casualties and recruitment from prisons and homeless shelters, Putin was running out of conventional military options. The attack on western Ukraine was a desperate attempt to terrorize NATO into reducing support for Ukraine, but the escalation backfired catastrophically. Instead of intimidating NATO, the attacks on western regions proved Putin was a direct threat to European security. The alliance stopped treating this as Ukraine's war and started treating it as Europe's war. The pattern became clear when analyzing Putin's recent decisions. The recruitment crisis, the economic strain, the attacks on civilian targets far from military objectives, all revealed a leader who had lost control of events and was lashing out desperately. But the most damaging aspect of the escalation was its irreversibility. Putin couldn't take back the attacks on western Ukraine. He couldn't undo the European officials' experience of Russian terror. He had crossed a line that fundamentally changed NATO's perception of the threat. The escalation revealed that Putin was no longer making rational strategic decisions. He was making desperate tactical moves that guaranteed his long-term defeat. The breaking point came when Putin realized his escalation had achieved the opposite of its intended effect. Instead of intimidating NATO into reducing support for Ukraine, the attacks on western regions accelerated weapons deliveries and increased alliance unity. The economic reality made the situation worse. Russia's war economy was collapsing under the strain of unsustainable military spending. The Institute for the Study of War reported that Russia cannot indefinitely replace its forces at the current casualty rate, while spending $25 billion on recruitment in 6 months. But the breaking point went beyond economics. Putin's attacks on western Ukraine proved to NATO that he was willing to risk direct confrontation with the alliance. This eliminated the alliance's restraint and opened the door to unlimited military support for Ukraine. The strategic situation became impossible for Putin. He faced a united NATO, a collapsing economy, a depleted military, and growing domestic pressure. Every option available to him made the situation worse, but the most devastating aspect of the breaking point was its inevitability. Putin's decision to attack western Ukraine was the logical result of his previous failures. Unable to defeat Ukraine militarily, he tried to terrorize NATO politically. The strategy was doomed from the start. The breaking point revealed that Putin had painted himself into a corner with no viable exit strategy, except defeat. The critical revelation was that Putin's escalation guaranteed his defeat by uniting his enemies and eliminating his strategic options. Every attack on western Ukraine strengthened NATO unity and increased Western support for Ukraine. The revelation went deeper than military analysis. Putin's willingness to attack regions near NATO borders proved he was no longer making rational calculations. A leader who risks nuclear war over a conflict he's already losing has abandoned strategic thinking entirely. But the most damaging revelation was political. Putin's attacks on western Ukraine while European officials were visiting proved he was more interested in terrorizing NATO than defeating Ukraine. This shifted the conflict from regional war to direct confrontation with the West. The critical insight was that Putin had fundamentally misunderstood NATO's psychology. He thought attacking western Ukraine would intimidate the alliance into reducing support. Instead, it convinced NATO that Putin was an existential threat to European security. But the revelation that sealed Putin's fate was strategic. By attacking western Ukraine, he proved he wouldn't stop at Ukraine's borders. This eliminated any possibility of negotiated settlement that left Putin in power with territorial gains. The critical revelation was that Putin's escalation had made his defeat not just likely, but inevitable. NATO's new strategy emerged from understanding that Putin's escalation had changed the nature of the conflict. The alliance stopped treating this as Ukraine's war and started treating it as a direct threat to European civilization. The strategic shift was comprehensive. NATO increased defense spending toward 5% of GDP, accelerated weapons deliveries to Ukraine, and began long-term planning for confrontation with Russia. Putin's attacks on western Ukraine had convinced the alliance that compromise was impossible, but the new strategy went beyond military support. NATO began treating Ukraine as the front line of European defense, with unlimited commitment to Ukrainian victory. The alliance realized that Putin's defeat was necessary for European security. The approach became systematic and sustainable. Instead of reactive support, NATO began proactive planning for Putin's defeat. The attacks on western Ukraine had convinced the alliance that half measures were insufficient, but most importantly, the new strategy was designed to be irreversible. NATO's commitment to Ukrainian victory became absolute because Putin's attacks on Western regions proved he would never accept peaceful coexistence with European democracy. The new strategy turned Putin's escalation into the catalyst for his own defeat. Putin's fate was sealed the moment he decided to attack Western Ukraine. The escalation that was supposed to intimidate NATO instead united the alliance against him with absolute commitment to his defeat. The new reality was that Putin faced not just Ukraine, but the entire Western alliance with unlimited resources and unwavering commitment. His attacks on Western regions had eliminated any possibility of negotiated settlement or face-saving exit, but the resolution went beyond military defeat. Putin's escalation had exposed him as an existential threat to European civilization. The alliance would not rest until he was removed from power, and Russia was no longer capable of threatening its neighbors. The mathematical inevitability of Putin's defeat became clear when analyzing the strategic balance. He faced a united NATO with overwhelming economic and military advantages, while his own resources were depleted and his options were exhausted. But the ultimate resolution was that Putin had defeated himself through his own escalation. By attacking Western Ukraine, he had guaranteed the very outcome he had tried to prevent: total NATO commitment to his destruction. Putin's decision to attack regions near NATO borders sealed his fate by proving he was too dangerous to be allowed to remain in power. The alliance would not make the mistake of leaving him capable of future aggression. Putin's attack on Western Ukraine transformed a regional conflict into an existential threat to European civilization, guaranteeing his defeat by uniting NATO with absolute commitment to his destruction. The strikes on Ivano-Frankivsk sealed his fate by proving he was too dangerous to be allowed to remain in power. The escalation that was supposed to intimidate NATO instead eliminated any possibility of negotiated settlement or face-saving exit. Putin now faces the entire Western alliance with unlimited resources and unwavering commitment to his complete defeat. But the mathematical inevitability of Putin's defeat raises the most dangerous question of all. What will a cornered dictator with nuclear weapons do when he realizes his conventional military options have been exhausted and his political survival is impossible?